Hello, everyone. This is Kit Cabela with Hard Lens Media. As you all know, we've been covering the 2020 election cycle, and not only is it's the presidential races that will get a lot of attention, but it'll also be the congressional candidates that should be getting a lot of attention as well. And throughout this next following weeks, Hard Lens Media will be interviewing progressive and independent candidates that are trying to bring in change in the United States House. So it's an extreme pleasure to introduce Steve Cox, who is running as an independent candidate for the California district, the 39th district. So for our viewers and subscribers, Steve Cox, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Steve Cox. Like you said, I'm running as an independent, kind of a perpetual candidate at this point because building sort of a grassroots it takes some time. You know, I don't have parties behind me, and frankly, I think that's kind of the point. You know, like if somebody said, hey, you could win tomorrow as a Democrat or whatever, I'm not sure I'd even necessarily take that because I'm trying to do this as an independent because I want to fix our democracy, because as of now, the two parties, seem to keep everything, polarized, and they end up binding up the Democrats end up binding up their progressives anyway. So, I'm trying to actually change how the system works and everything, but I am in the 39th district in California, which is Chino Hills, Walnut, Diamond Bar, Hacienda Heights, Roland Heights, La Habra, Brea, Fullerton. I think part of Anaheim Hills is in there, Yorba Linda. So it's a kind of a wide swath. It's in 3 different counties. So, that's where I'm running, and because this is where I've lived my whole life. So that's where I'm going after it.
Okay, and on Hard Lens Media, we've interviewed a lot of independent candidates. We've interviewed Greens and Libertarians, people associated with DSA or Socialist Alternative. So I think what a lot of people want to know is what kind of an independent candidate are you? Are you like progressive, libertarian, conservative, liberal? I mean, it's very important to at least know the distinction of where you kind of fall in line, because I've read a lot of your policies and they're very progressive. So I think if you just clarify that, we would like to understand it just a little bit better.
Well, frankly, I think I classify as progressive, like when people want to label me and stuff. But frankly, when you said those things, you're like a progressive, libertarian, liberal, conservative. I could just say yes, because there are things on each of those that I sort of align with. I'm on the political compass. If you know what that is, right? The 4 quadrants.
Yes.
I'm bottom left corner. I'm bottom left quadrant. So I'm libertarian left.
Okay.
So I want people to be free from government interference, but I also want people to be free from private enterprise and the interference that comes along with that. I think that's the kind of dividing line between a left wing and a right wing libertarian. Is right wing libertarians, those people tend to believe that the government shouldn't violate your rights, but it's perfectly fine if health insurance companies or pharmaceutical companies do it. And I'm like, no for both.
All right. So I think this is a 2-part question then. First, what a lot of viewers want to know is who is the current incumbent of the 39th district in California? And then second, running as an independent, what kind of pushback are you getting from the establishment? Because here in Illinois, for example, if you're running as a Green or a Libertarian or as just a straight independent, you got to meet a lot of voter requirements just to make it on the ballot.
Yeah, well, and that's actually what prevented me up until the last election, 2018 election, from even getting involved in trying to run, because I have been an independent since 2002 or 3, somewhere in there. But the California state laws got changed in about 2010 or 12 or something like that. That made it possible for this, because otherwise, they came to a top 2 primary thing here in California. So now you don't need any political affiliation to run. But what you do, you still do have like a minimum vote number requirement and stuff like that. There are some weird things that are still stacked against people who aren't a member of either of the 2 major parties. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, this is probably the best chance that I have, that we have as independents. I mean, to try and buck the system and kick both parties out. The guy I'm running against is Gil Cisneros. He's a Democrat. He's in the progressive caucus, but he doesn't support the Green New Deal. He doesn't support Medicare for all. He doesn't support ending support for the war in Yemen, or like, I don't know. I think you could just sign up to be in the Progressive Caucus. I don't think there's like requirements, but you know, he's a Democrat. But he made his money as a lottery winner. He won $266 million in the lottery in 2010. And so he spent like $12 million of his, you know, mostly of his own money, running in the 2018 to win that seat. And frankly, you know, to give you some background, you know, before or after Trump got elected in early 2017, he flew back, Cisneros did, and started meeting with Democratic Party operatives and lobbyists and things like that, donating money in, and so into the DCCC, into the DNC. And so, you know, there were a bunch of other Democrats in the race last time that were better. I mean, all of them were better than Gil, to be honest with you. But, you know, Gil had the support of the party already because he had flown back there, put a bunch of money in and everything else. So it was kind of, you know, they were always the party was always officially going to support Gil. And that, I think, is what put him over the top a little bit, but that plus his money.
All right.
You know, now there's another Democrat in it who was in it early in 2018 and then dropped out. His name is Jay Chen. He lost to the Republican that used to hold this seat back in like 2012. I don't really like that guy either. and then there's a couple of Republicans in. One of them is the Republican that lost to Gil in 2018 in the general election, Young Kim. And then there's another male, I don't know, I forget his name at this point, but you know, I think I'm the only independent at this point. But you know, for me, like, we can talk all these things about wanting Medicare for all or universal health care, wanting to get us out of these wars, wanting to end mass incarceration, wanting to address climate change in a real way. We can talk about all these things, but frankly, until we actually fix our democracy, until the parties or the people that are in Washington represent us, actual people, and not just wealthy donors, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We can talk about it all we want.
Well, then let's actually talk about something that we've mentioned numerous times here at Hardlens Media, getting money out of politics. We've said that because we have such a corrupt system, we have basically legalized bribery. We have an oligarchy that's running amok.
That's right.
And one of your campaign issues, one of your policy issues is talking about getting money out of politics. So I want you to clarify your policy about getting money out of politics. What would you be willing to propose to deal with Citizens United and McCutcheon's decision? Because how do we really reform such a corrupt neoliberal system when, you know, the person, whether a Democrat or Republican, whoever has the most money in their war chest usually wins? So what is your plan with dealing with getting money out of politics?
Well, there's a couple of things about this. Number one is we're almost to the point of starting a constitutional convention. We have more than half the states that we need to sign on to do that in order to overturn Citizens United as a constitutional amendment. That is one of the, I mean, it's the worst ruling I've ever seen the Supreme Court make. And I think generally speaking, usually they get it right. This was as far wrong as I've ever seen. But, you know, I mean, the whole corporations are people, like, oh my God. But, you know, honestly, a thing that I've been running into a lot that's it's making me a little bit crazy is, like, even in the 2018 election and in some of the candidate forums we had and stuff like that, this money in politics thing always comes up. Conservatives don't want money in politics, like, you know, regular people I'm talking about. Liberals don't either, right? Everybody seems to not like money in politics. They all seem to hate it. And what I keep telling people at these candidate forums, I'm like, hey, everybody in the audience, you know, you can fix this by yourself. You don't need a politician to fix this for you. And in fact, if a politician benefits from that system before they get in, the odds of them actually, you know, overturning or doing something to get money out of politics is pretty slim. You know, so you're asking people to basically cut off their own noses, right? Mm-hmm. But this is one of those issues, to be perfectly honest with you, that the people themselves can fix, because they can just collectively decide not to vote for people who take all this corporate money. They could actually decide to do that, but they don't. And that's the part that kind of drives me crazy, because as much as everybody talks about it on either side, mm-hmm. As much as people talk about wanting to get money out of politics, they won't put their vote where their mouth is, you know, and that really, you know, kills me. Like, how long are we going to complain about it before somebody actually decides, before everybody actually decides to just stop doing it? Because I think that's ultimately the fix. That'll come probably faster than a constitutional convention, because once you get enough people like me, people who don't take that money, in office, then we can overturn Citizens United. But it's kind of like the vote has to happen first, right? The people have to decide to not vote for people who take that corporate money first.
Right.
I think that's the only way it's going to actually get fixed.
Now, because especially this election cycle is going to get a lot of attention, but most notably it's going to probably be just the presidential primaries that are going to get a lot of attention. In California, who are the major lobby groups that are basically trying to support either Republicans or Democrats? Because it's quite clear that because this election cycle is going to be very intense and there's going to be both sides wanting to have the control over the United States Senate and House, who are the major power players in California, and who's actually putting in their own financial muscle within the 39th District of California?
As far as individual donors, or is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm talking about like the major corporations or lobby groups that might perhaps, I don't know.
We have Raytheon in the district. Raytheon has an office in Fullerton, like a pretty big, center in Fullerton. I've run into quite a few people who actually, work at Raytheon, and some of them profess to be progressive and stuff, but they still work for Raytheon. You got to pay your bills. There's also the Teamsters Union on the left that puts in money, but I run into some weirdness with them because of some of the unions still seem to think that the Democrats support them, which in the last 30 years, I'm not sure that you can make a good case for that, but that's still where they're kind of stuck, it seems. But there's also, it's everywhere. Healthcare is the biggest one. And if you look at, even Gil, he spent like $10 million, maybe $11 million of his own money to win the seat, which you can't do that every 2 years, even if you have, no matter how much money you have. Like, you can't just spend $11 million every 2 years to get the seat. But he still, even with that, took like $30-some thousand from, health insurance, pharmaceutical companies and stuff like that. So, but ultimately what's happening lately is that the health insurance and, the healthcare industry, big time, has been putting money into Democrat runs specifically and supporting Democrats because they're trying to keep the Democratic Party from supporting Medicare for all or things like that. So that's what we're likely going to be seeing coming up. I think that now that there's a couple more people in the race, we're going to see some good stuff on from the FEC through Open Secrets or, directly at the FEC for money that's coming into the people in this race. But, it's going to, I bet you, my bet is that most of the money from the healthcare industry goes to Gil.
Okay.
Because he's the incumbent and he's a Democrat, and they're trying to prevent Medicare for all, so they're paying off the Democrats to keep it from happening.
Okay, so now let's actually talk about another policy issue that you have on your campaign website, and that's talking about universal health care. And of course, there's two different distinctions. There's universal health care and there's Medicare for all. What is your policy? Where do you stand on this, especially universal health care, as it says on your campaign website? How would you actually propose to introduce that into the United States Congress should you win your seat? And also, I've heard you mention Medicare for all. Are you using them both for the same term, or could you please clarify that?
I can explain this. So universal health care is that everybody's covered, right? That's basically what that means. Single payer is that everybody's covered by the government, essentially, right? So that's the UK is single payer. Most of Scandinavian countries are single payer. Canada is single payer. I think Australia is single payer. I think Japan's single payer. But most of Western Europe is not single payer. I support Medicare for all, as a step in the right direction, because the way I look at it is we have 18% of GDP is spent on healthcare in our country, and it's going up. It's supposed to be up to 25% in current projections by 2030. The most they spend anywhere in Western Europe in any of the OECD countries is about 12%. The highest paid doctors in the world are in the Netherlands, and they pay about 11%. And it's not a single payer system there, but still the point is they pay 11%. Whereas here we pay 18, the average is 9, and the low end of the spectrum in the OECD nations in terms of the amount of GDP they spend for healthcare to cover everybody are all single payer countries. Those are the cheapest ones. So that's already obvious that if you get the private profit motive or any sort of private business inside that it's going to cost more money to have private business involved. I think that's a given. The thing that bothers me is that Medicare for all, the projections I've seen still put us at like between Jayapal and Bernie's things, they still put the projection at about 15.5%, 16% of GDP. And I mean, that's an improvement, but when we're looking at 12% as the highest it is anywhere else that has any sort of universal health care, that's the thing that bothers me. I don't understand, frankly, why we can't get down to 12%. And I think that 12% should be the highest that we accept, because that's already being done elsewhere. And we have the highest GDP per capita. So the amount of money we spend, like our 12% would be a lot more money than many of the other countries that are at 12% or less. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of looking at it like, I want a system that's going to be at 12% or less. That's what I'm aiming for. So that's where I get a little bit of, on my website stuff talking about, universal health care. If those Medicare for all bills come up for vote, I will vote for those, but I will also make it very clear that that's a step toward 12% of GDP, because that's what I'm aiming for, because that's 6% of GDP. If you calculate that out, and if you divided it among every single American, regardless of age, whether they were born yesterday or going to die tomorrow, okay, it's over $350 per person per month. That's how much that 6% of GDP is. So when you think about from that perspective, the amount of economic stimulus that could be involved, I mean, it could genuinely change our economy to free up that kind of capital in the system, and that's kind of what I look at, is that it's not just about having everybody covered, although that is a good moral position, and I believe that that's the right moral position. It's also, it needs to be a lot cheaper, because that's the only way we can ensure it against getting overturned later, because everybody thinks it's still too expensive. Like the cheaper we can get it, the better it's going to be, and the more it will turn into a political third rail, if you will, like Medicare is now, or Social Security is now, where people will lose elections by threatening to cut that stuff.
All right. And then real quick for our viewers and subscribers, one of the issues that we've talked about a lot is climate change and how it's going to impact, not only this country, but for the world. What is your stance on addressing with the clear environmental disasters that are associated with climate change? What is your proposal on really dealing with something like this? Where do you stand on renewable energies?
Well, I got a story behind this too, because my wife's pregnant. She's due in December, actually on Christmas Day. That's our due date. And I'm 42. She'll be 40 by the time the baby's born. We had been trying to have a baby for quite a while, and it wasn't working out. But then a little while back, we gave up because of medical expenses. The amount of money it's going to cost just to birth the child, much less rear the child, in medical expenses. And then climate change was a big part of that, because I'm reading these stories like from Vice and other places like that are showing, 2050 is like on this path. They're figuring that society is going to break down prior to 2050. So we're looking at 30 years on this trajectory before society comes apart. And that's scary stuff to bring a kid into the world under those circumstances, but that's what we're doing.
Right.
And the thing is I don't have a policy position on my website for climate change, because of the fact that the stuff that it keeps getting introduced, it doesn't go far enough yet. Mm-hmm. And like I got contacted by the no fossil fuel, whatever that was. It's a bill that's out. It's going to get us off fossil fuels by 2035 was right. How they presented it to me. But like I asked them about like, okay, so what are we doing as part of this bill to invest in, different battery technologies or electrical technologies for vehicles, for, different, improving solar technologies and other sort of renewables. and all this stuff. And what are we doing to help the poor and the working classes to afford electric vehicles?
Right.
Because right now you can't afford a Tesla if you're just some regular person who has to commute every day to work or whatever. You can't spend $80, $100, $1,000 on a Tesla, and whatever. And then we need the technology, because like even from where I am, it's 225 miles to Las Vegas, and I consider that like a day's drive. It's about a 3.5 hour drive, under 3 if you drive fast. But it's 225 miles, and there are very few, if any, electric cars that can go over 200 miles anyway, right? So you'd have to stop and get more electricity on board just to get to Las Vegas from my house, and that doesn't seem like a realistic way of looking at things right now. But there are some promising results with hydrogen power and fuel cells that like Toyota's working on, and things like that are, I think, could be applied very easily actually to freight trains and things like that, instead of having them run on diesel. Because if you know something about freight trains, they actually have a diesel generator that generates electricity, and then that powers an electric motor that then pulls the weight, because electric motors make a ton of torque. So you can actually pretty easily put in hydrogen infrastructure along rail lines to make sure that the trains could run on hydrogen. And I think that's one step in the right direction. But it's a major problem. And we need to get on it right away, but we also need to be aware. And the thing that I focus on is I don't want to further victimize the poor and working classes, and let off all these wealthy people, let them off the hook, and just be like, hey, you either have to buy, an electric vehicle and run your house on solar and everything else on your own, or you're in trouble or whatever.
Right.
These people need help too. So it's kind of it's a tough deal. But I'm an MMT guy. I believe that's the correct way of looking at finances. So I think that it can be done pretty easy. It's just a matter of having the will.
All right, and final question for our viewers and subscribers, because I think a lot of people might want to learn more about your campaign, find you online on social media. Where can they learn more about you?
Well, my social media is Real Steve Cox all the way across the board. At Facebook, that's my congressional page, facebook.com/Real Steve Cox, Instagram and Twitter. And just as an aside, there's another Steve Cox running for Congress in Kentucky right now, running for Senate.
We are aware of that.
Yeah, there's a common name, and like there was a player for the Tampa Bay Rays or something like that who was named Steve Cox before. So by the time I signed up for Twitter, I couldn't just get Steve Cox. So that's why it's Real Steve Cox. I meant it tongue in cheek at the time, because it was just kind of a funny way to do it. Like, I'm the only one. But so just so people know that I'm not an arrogant jerk. It's just, that's just happened to be the thing that caught on. So, but and then on my website and on my Facebook and on my Twitter profile, my Instagram profile, you'll see a donation link. For Democracy Engine, who handles my online donation stuff. And right now we're working on putting out a video. We're going to be filming it this coming week. I'm a writer and photographer, so I have friends in video and photography and stuff, so they're helping me out a little bit there. But I wrote the script and everything else, so we're shooting it this week, and we should have it out in the next few weeks. And I think that's going to help people really understand sort of what I'm after and what I'm doing a lot more than anything else. So hopefully just look for that. And if you guys feel like helping me out, I could use it.
All right. Well, other than that, thank you, Steve Cox, for joining Hard Lens Media. This is Kit. Peace and take care.